Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, I'm pleased to address you today at this international conference dedicated to safeguarding democracy and fighting corruption. I am a believer in democracy, and as you saw it in Washington, but also in many places of the world, and especially here in Moldova, I come from a country whose people cherish democracy, fight for democracy, and who want it see work for them. 30 years ago, Moldova decided to build a democratic society. We have approved laws, we created institutions, and we borrowed or tried to learn from the best European and international practices in an attempt to build a strong state which would work for the citizens, which would defend their rights and freedoms, would uphold market economy, and ensure that the rules apply to everyone equally. Unfortunately, many of these reforms were successful only on paper, despite having sophisticated laws in place, which were meant to ensure the independence of the key institutions. Most of the institutions in my country remain weak, corrupt, and prone to external influences. And the Moldovan judiciary is among the worst offenders. It happens today that the corrupt schemes, including the banking sector fraud, but many others about which the entire region or even the world knows about, have happened with the contribution of judges through their illegal decisions. Bad court decisions got Moldova condemned by the European Court of Human Rights and cost our budget tens of millions of euros in damage. Corrupt judges chase our foreign investors away, and even our own citizens who flee the country looking for a better life elsewhere. And courts often fail to punish the most or the biggest corrupt people who are guilty of serious crimes. As a result, public trust in the judiciary, but also in the state, is going down. It's not an easy reform to undertake, and I did win these elections on the anti-corruption agenda, promising that I will fight for the justice sector reform and that I will fight for strengthening the capacity of the anti-corruption institutions. It's a difficult fight, but I do have the support of people. At the same time, the opposition from within the system is very, very high. We've been talking about the independence of justice, and this has been a discussion that we're having also with the international partners who are trying to help us. But it looks that we haven't been talking enough about the accountability of judges, because when you provide corrupt judges with independence, this definitely doesn't solve the issue. On the contrary, they just continue to take illegal decisions, which are helping the corrupt groups in Moldova. And what happens today in my country is that there is no one person, as it happened in the past with Plahotniuk's regime, who would control the entire system. But there are several corruption clans who just go around and try to buy the decisions of the judges. So judges can choose whom to sell the decision and how much to get for this. And of course, the state cannot compete with such corruption groups, even if the state is ready and is paying relatively good salaries in the system. So it's a difficult reform, despite the fact that, as I said, that in Moldova there is huge support on behalf of the citizens for this reform. What we see now as the next step is the extraordinary external evaluation of judges and prosecutors to eliminate all the corrupt individuals from the system. And then, of course, to strengthen the capacity and to strengthen the independence of both the justice sector and the body of prosecutors. For that, we need a parliament or a majority in the parliament which would support the laws that have to be passed to go through this extraordinary evaluation of judges and prosecutors. And we happen to have snap parliamentary elections in a few weeks. And I very much hope that the Moldovans would continue to support honest people so that we will be able to go on with this important reforms. We are trying to learn from the countries in the region. We know that many of the countries are struggling. And we also know that we need to do this reform as soon as possible because people in Moldova, many of the people from Moldova have left the country already, and we need to restore people's trust as soon as possible in order not to see the others leaving the country, but also hoping that at least part of the diaspora will come back.
Maia, can I ask you a question in that regard? You were talking about systemic corruption in Moldova. What is the source of that corruption, and how much connection do we have between our countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, in exporting that corruption?
Well, Moldova is not such a rich country, but somehow the crooks find ways to extract huge amounts. For instance, the recent international study showed that the amount of the illegal financial flows in Moldova account for $1 billion annually. Maybe this is not, but I guess this is a big amount even for Ukraine. But if you compare this or put it in the context of the Moldovan size, then you will understand how much this is. And of course, there have been different, and there are different ways the crooks get to extract people from the country. The banking sector fraud, the infamous banking sector fraud, for which, by the way, we haven't seen any results of the investigation because no one has been punished so far. This has happened 6 years ago, and no one single cent has been recovered. You can imagine how people feel here, people, because they do have to repay the hole created in the banking sector by this fraud, the money laundering, the Russian laundromat. I have to remind you that we speak here about tens of billions of dollars of dirty money which have been laundered through the Moldovan banks and courts. And here, our prosecution hasn't even started to investigate such a big corruption scheme. Then, of course, is the procurement, which involves corrupt civil servants who, together with some people from the private sector, manage to get money out of the state more than what their services and goods that they're selling to the state deserve. So, and then we have rider attacks on different sectors. For instance, right now, we're witnessing a rider attack on the insurance system. And things happen in a way which is difficult to imagine when the crooks, the people involved, go to the court, and then the court cancels the decisions of the regulators. It might be the decision of the central bank or the decision of the National Security Commission. So, and these are definitely illegal decisions, but because there hasn't been any punishment for illegal decisions taken towards the judges, because the prosecution is very slow at initiating cases against the judges. This keeps happening. Smuggling is a big issue, and smuggling is an issue which has to be tackled together, as money laundering has to be tackled together, because for this kind of corruption schemes, there are no borders, and we do need the cooperation of the countries in the region. And I have discussed the issue, for instance, the issue of fighting smuggling in the Transnistrian region. I've discussed it with President Zelensky, and I do count on Ukraine's support here. But also when we talk about fighting money laundering, we need the involvement of international institutions. We need the involvement of prosecutor offices in some of the European countries, because some of this money ended up there in their countries. Also, when we talk about big corruption schemes, the Moldovan crooks will buy assets again in the developed countries. This is where they like to spend their money, and here we need the assistance, the support of the institutions in the countries where the assets are, in order to trace them and to seize them and to repay the budget.
Maia, thank you so much. I really appreciate your staying with us today, unlike our president, the Ukrainian president, unfortunately.